All right, Rudyard, you're a happily married man. What is the secret?
A bunch of things, one of which for me has been having kids. I mean, it didn't surprise me when we were researching for this next story that 4 in 10 first marriages end in divorce, and the majority of those marriages were childless. If you have children, it's a, it binds you together in a way that few other things do in a marriage.
In good and in bad. But in fact, yes, our next guest says that divorce is too easy in Canada. She's done a study to that effect. We're pleased to welcome Andrea Mrozek. She's the manager of research and communications at the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada in Ottawa. So, Andrea, why is it too easy to split up in this country?
I don't think it's fair necessarily to say it's too easy if you examine those individuals who have gone through divorce. But the paper I wrote basically commented on the fact that no-fault divorce as a legal system hasn't achieved what it set out to achieve. Namely, it was supposed to make divorce less acrimonious. I don't think we see evidence of that. And furthermore, it was supposed to allow people to get out of their unhappy marriages so that they would then be happier down the road. What research actually shows is that people who manage to tough it out through a really tough point in their marriage, that 5 years later, unhappily married couples can be happy, where the same cannot be said of those who divorce. So at this time, I'd say it's time to examine whether we need to reinstitute some things to strengthen marriages rather than looking at how to make divorce easier.
Okay, I've got to jump in here because I know my own mother, because of Pierre Trudeau, I wouldn't be here if divorce laws hadn't been liberalized under Pierre Trudeau, and she was telling me how so many people...
That would be a shame, Tasha.
Thank you. And so many people at that time, the late 60s, were stuck in marriages. They were unhappy. They were unable to move on and go to that happiness that you're talking about. So, I mean, are you recommending any kind of rollback to previous times when it was more difficult to get divorced? What's the solution you're advocating?
Basically, pre-1960s, when no-fault divorce laws changed across the world, the globe started to change divorce laws around that time. That was one end of the pendulum where it was way too difficult. Now we've swung that pendulum to a point where it may be too easy, and what I'm looking for is not a return to the days when it was too difficult, not at all, rather looking at trying to find that happy medium and using the research to talk about why family strength matters, why it's important for children. Children fare best when their parents are married. So those sorts of things, just to draw attention to that.
Andrea, almost half of Canadian adults do not exist in a marriage. They're single for whatever set of circumstances. So, I mean, why aren't the laws where they are at now simply a reflection of where society is at? I mean, and isn't that what laws really should do, is mirror the mores and the realities of the larger society as opposed to trying to correct them? I mean, that sounds very kind of big government.
Well, there's no form of correction when you're looking. We've had a system. What marriage is? Marriages are one of the last remaining things that everyone agrees on with marriage is that it's lifelong. We may not agree on whether it's opposite sex is involved. We may not agree on other points of what marriage is. But initially, the intent of marriage was that it was to be lifelong. 90% of Canadian divorces today, roughly 85 to 90% of Canadian divorces, are the result of low-conflict marriages. So in the 10% where it's a high-conflict abusive marriage, sure, you got to get out of there. But in the percentage where it's actually a low conflict marriage, where counseling perhaps could help, where marriage mentoring perhaps could help, if we can institute some of those things, particularly where children are involved, it's not a measure of coercion, it's a measure of reflection. Most people want to be married for a lifetime.
Okay, let me bring in another guest with a point of view on that, who's dealt with both probably low and high conflict marriages in her legal practice, and that's Brenda Kosman. She is a family law lawyer coming to us from Toronto. Brenda, Andrea says divorce might be too easy, that it's better for people to tough it out through the tough patch. Is that your experience with your clients? Do you believe that?
No, not really at all. Now, I have nothing against at all trying to encourage people to reconcile, to provide them counseling, to even have pre-marriage counseling. I think all those are really good things. But the idea that people divorce too easily or that divorce itself is too easy, that really it's just not the case. By the time people decide to get divorced, things have gotten pretty bad. And it's not, and I think there's a real problem suggesting that, that it's a question of only high conflict divorces being about violence and abuse. That's also not the case. It's about a tremendous amount of conflict that people have with each other. One of the things we do know is that high conflict is really bad for kids. It gets to a point that people want to get out of their marriages. And divorce, there's absolutely nothing easy about it. All the divorce reform really did in 1985, first in 1986 and then again in 1985, was to take one thing off the table that people are fighting about, and that's about the ground for divorce itself. People still have so much else to fight about: property, child support, spousal support, and particularly where their children are going to live. And anything we can do to try to bring the acrimony down and get people to focus on the really tough issues would be terrific.
Okay, Brenda, I think we all agree that that was a sensible reform in the mid-'80s, but what about Andrea's idea of something, let's say, mandatory counseling? If you're going to go forward with a divorce, what about saying to the couple, you have to have a period of mandatory counseling to see if this marriage can be put back together? Is that a practical solution that you would support?
I would support encouraging people to go for counseling. I would support trying to create a culture in which people would go for counseling, but to actually put one more roadblock in the way. When right now we have a family law system that is in incredible crisis, where folks can't get access to the family justice system, they can't afford the lawyers, they can't afford what they need to do to get out of a difficult marriage, and divorce is a financially and emotionally difficult moment in time. To put one more legal obstacle in their way, I would have a problem with that. Encouraging it, absolutely. Making it legally mandated, absolutely not.
Andrea, do you think that marriage and divorce laws have devalued marriage in society? Has that been a side effect of the liberalization of divorce?
To a degree, yes. I think that when the law acts as a teacher, then if divorce is easily accessible, then people will move out of it. And I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of mandated counseling either, by the way. There's a cultural milieu in which research is done and to talk about the drawbacks for children, to inform Canadians on that. And in the move initially from the divorce laws changed, some people would argue that it went from one person being able, from needing to have agreement between spouses that divorce was inevitable, to having one person be able to leave on their own. And so if you see that divorce law reform in that perspective, it's actually it's more unfair if one person can hightail out of it there without the agreement of the other.
Okay, Andrea, we want to give Brenda the final word here. Brenda, is there anything with divorce law right now, you're an expert, you're immersed in it, anything that you would change, or is the system just fine and leave it the way it is?
I don't think I would touch anything around fault or no-fault divorce. What we did in getting rid of fault divorce or moving towards no-fault divorce was just take away one of the many things that people fought about. And you'd have to go to court and make some really nasty allegations about your spouse to get a divorce in the olden days. I think that that's gone. That's so much better. But we do have lots of other things we can do to try to reduce conflict in divorce, and I think we need to be working on that.
Okay, Brenda Kosman, Andrea Mrozek, thanks very much for coming on National Affairs today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.